It's lesson 3, part 2, and we've scaffolded out a create view and looked at how basic model validation works. I've pushed those changes up to GitHub. So we want to explore some of the kind of interesting and unique syntax that we'll see in ASP.NET, using the view syntax that Microsoft calls Razor. So Razor includes these attributes like @ to demarcate server-side code, multi-line blocks of code enclosed then in curly braces that are prefixed with this @ symbol, and then some of the ASP directives that we've already been working with and looked at. But there's going to be some other things. So we want to explore some of the common syntax features. So if you're here in WebEx, what I'm going to do in a minute, I'm going to start the breakout groups. And you can find your group on Blackboard. I believe there is a groups link for you on Blackboard. Actually, I've added it here. So it should show you that you're in either activity group 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So in a minute, I'm going to pause the recording. I'm going to set up 5 breakout groups, and then you can move yourself into the appropriate group. If you are working alone, you're doing this lesson, you're not joining us in the live session, I still want you to participate in this activity, and there is actually, this counts toward your in-class activity grade. So you can do this on your own if you're not in class. If you are in class, you can do it with your group. So there's a link on Blackboard. It says more on view syntax. So once you've identified your group using the groups link, you're going to click on this link to open up a shared PowerPoint file. So I'll just open that up. Now I don't want any, please don't download the file. So you're going to get this kind of splash screen, title page, and then you have this option that says edit in browser. So I want you to click on it. Now, if you are in group 1, I'm going to put you in breakout group 1. So what I want you to do is on this slide, I want you to put in an explanation of what this Razor syntax code means. So you can just click here and in the text box add it. I also want everybody in the breakout group to add their name to the slide because your participation in this activity is graded. Basically, you participated or you didn't. If you're in group 2, you're going to use slide 3. Okay, so there's some code here, and I tell you which file, if you're in group 2, this is the file you're going to inspect, and you have to do a little investigation of what these lines of code mean. Put in an explanation and put in your names. Group 3, you've got slide 4. Group 4, so you're not supposed to be doing this on your own. This is a group activity. And group 5. If you are doing this after class, you're watching the video, there's a bunch of slides starting with slide 8 that says asynchronous users. And you're going to find some other ASP view code, put in an explanation and your name. And again, this activity counts towards your grade. So only going to give you don't need a lot of time for this, maybe 5-10 minutes tops. I'm going to pause the recording and start the breakout rooms. And please move yourself into the breakout room that corresponds to your group. So on your group slide, you're going to put in an explanation of the code and your names of everybody in the breakout group. If you have a question, you can message me through WebEx. I'm going to pause. Okay, so we are back. So let's have a look at what you guys found. So view data is a static controller attribute. We're assigning it a value of homepage in the index view. And yeah, this changes the first part of the page title in the browser tab. So it will appear as homepage and then our project name. So thanks, Jason, Connor, Jay, Rashmeet, and Shamandeep. That's a good explanation. And we can see this. So if we set view data here, if we go to our shared and layout, right, we can see that this view data title property is rendered in the title tag, followed by our .NET drinks. So that's where it gets rendered. All right, so group 2 was looking at this shared login partial. So that's this file. We haven't really looked at it. So we've got these first 3 lines. So yep, @ symbol indicates server-side code. And we're going to work with ASP.NET Core.Identity. We'll work with it, I think, starting in week 6 when Eduardo takes over. And it basically is a library for handling authorization and authentication. So things like membership, login, user data. So using means we are including the library in this page. And we use both the sign-in manager and user manager for managing user accounts. Okay, excellent answer. So we're basically involving dependencies here. So group 3, and I apologize, I do see the relevance of your picture. I thought it was just there for design. But we see in our shared layout, we've got render body, which is where we're injecting the content into this layout kind of wrapper container that we've got. So using the layout, all content in the child view is rendered inside of this div class of container body content, which we could change if we don't want to use those classes. And we're only allowed a single render body statement in a single layout view. So we've got one layout template so far. We could use different layouts, however. Maybe we have different site designs for different areas of the site. We might have one layout for the public website. We might use a separate layout with different links, even different CSS, etc., in, let's say, a private area of the site. But in each case, we will inject the code, the individual page code, here with this render body statement we see on line 35. So here we've got 2 coffee mugs, same layout, same container, but different content being rendered in the middle, different designs here. So your image is great. I misunderstood probably why that was in there. Then we've got this render scripts, which we also see on layout. So this takes the code in our script section, not actually from the controller. It's actually using the scripts that are in our wroot.js and bundling them here. So any client-side scripts that we have are rendered asynchronously, so they're deferred. So thanks, Judong, Eric, and Ujwal. And lastly, we see this in our form. So we kind of looked at these already. We had a validation summary and an ASP4 and validation for. So this is for validation checking on the name property. Yeah, and we want this, but we don't want to tell them the actual reason. We just want to say, hey, the data you gave us is wrong. You need to fix it. Right. All right, so I will be sure to give everybody their mark for contributing to the activity. And again, if you're doing this lesson on your own time before next week, please make sure you find some other piece of view syntax that's not standard HTML that we haven't talked about. You can copy and paste the code up here and put in an explanation and your name in order to get your grade for this activity. Anybody have any questions about any of the view syntax that we've looked at so far? Okay.
Rich,
Yes, go ahead.
quick question about the validation code.
Yes.
We were working on the brand.cs file.
Yes.
Then we inserted like required to make that Exactly.
Yes.
So we left, actually, how exactly it works? Because for this required is related with the name string or int
The name.
ID.
Yes, the annotations go above the property name.
Okay.
So you can see, so if we put required, it's attached to, it belongs to the property that is below it. Just like here, we've got the range, and it is
Okay.
attached to the year founded property below. So these annotations
Sure.
must go above the property they are supposed to work with.
Okay, perfect. And then for ID, we don't have this required function. But if we go there, I check it, I just pick it in create with no value, no information, and I got the same info.
That's because it's a special name. Because we've called it ID or model ID, it will
We
get treated
must.
like a key, so it will automatically be required.
Okay. If thinking about, for example, database or something like that, we
Yeah.
must have this information.
Yes, that's right.
Perfect.
We can also, the one
And
other
it's
thing I
really
should point out is we can customize this error. So right now, if I leave it blank, right, it says name field is required. If I want, I can put in a parameter, which is error message equals. If I put in as a string an error message, now I'm going to get this message instead of this one. So this is all customizable. Ruger, I'll come to your question in just a moment. It's an excellent question. So now, if I put something in, now it will read that error message that I've added to the model. So you can
cool.
customize these if you like.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so we want to come back to this one. So Booger said, why do we have using and then we've got inject? Excellent question. So using means we are referencing the library or the dependency. Okay, so we are. I will leave it out. So here we are making a reference to the identity dependency that came when we set up our project. So what about, actually it's in here. So the inject, in this case, we're injecting, it's not a dependency as a whole, it's a particular object. Okay, so we are supplying a particular object, two of them in fact, a sign-in manager class and a user manager class. So here we're referencing an entire code library. Here we're referencing two specific classes that we need within, that are inside this dependency. Okay, so the difference is subtle. Does that help, Bugra? Okay, excellent question, right? Because then we're using, for example, this sign-in manager object to check the is signed in property. Because you'll notice we have two different versions of the nav bar, right? Whether I'm signed in or signed out, I see different links. So we'll change this. So here's in our project website that I used, I built it using .NET Core. Right? Notice up here in the login partial, when I'm signed in, it says hello and it's got my username and it's got log out. If I sign out, Well, I change it so you don't actually see anything, right? But if I log in, so there's this logic in the login partial that's checking if the user signed in, show hello and their name and a log out link, otherwise show them register and log in. So we're using this class that we're injecting. Okay. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but I want to just kind of do a bit of a review of some of the stuff we've talked about with views already, and also touch on a couple of other features. Now, these slides, this is fairly long. Again, I'm not going to go through all of it, just the important stuff. And you can find this for reference. Actually, I'll go full screen with it in a minute. You can find these slides for reference in Blackboard in the week 3 folder. So you've got these notes. You don't have to take notes. I've posted the slides in week 3. Right here. Here are your week 3 slides. So I'm just going to go over some of the important stuff. And if you have questions, feel free. Okay, slideshow's not going to work that way. Hang on just a second. I've got to duplicate my displays. Okay, so we know that views are our UI layer in an MVC framework. But unlike in PHP, we can't load views directly. You can't just go to the browser, load it to a view, and tell it to render. The view always has to get called by the controller. Okay, and in the simple cases like we've done, the view doesn't need any information. We just call return view, page loads. But most of the time, our controller is going to provide some kind of information. And if it's a data object, we're using that model declaration. So then the view takes that model, like our brand model, a customer model, a product, and it transforms it into something usable, a usable form for our end user. So we've looked at view bag already, which is limited, but easy if we're passing simple data, like a message here. Like, invalid login. We might stick in a view bag message, and then we can just render it out in the view. We've talked about the @ character in the Razor syntax. So when it sees @ it knows, the view engine knows this is not HTML. So we can use it in front of a single server-side expression, or we can wrap, for example, multi-lines inside of an @ with curly braces. But I want to talk about some of the conventions, some of the naming conventions. We've talked about some of them already. So one of them is we know that our view names, file names, should match the controller actions. If we have a controller method called create, we build a view that also is called create. And then each controller has its own folder. So if we have an account controller and home controller, in views, we have an account subfolder and a home subfolder. The following conventions, again, saves us work, and it lets us use the automated scaffolding tools in Visual Studio. Right? So we could create a method called index that loads a view called not index, but then we have to specify the name specifically, which is not ideal. And we've worked with strongly typed views a little bit now, last week, and then the new view we created this week. So this is kind of similar to what we did last week. We had a method called list. We've mocked up some data. And in this example, used the view bag to pass the data to the view. And then in our view, we could loop through all the items in the view bag. But it's dynamic, it's not strongly typed. So instead, we wanted to use a strongly typed view instead. So we've created a model class We mocked up a list of that type of model, and then we passed the strongly typed data to our view. Then we declared our model of type IEnumerable, because this page gets a list, and then we can use our Razor syntax to loop through and display each item. So this is kind of what we did last week at the end of class, our list of brands. Now we've also got this concept of a view model. We're probably not going to work with it, but you might hear about it, so I'm just going to explain what it is. Sometimes we might want to display data in a view that doesn't neatly map to only one model in our project. Maybe we're using data from different models that are joined together. So think of something like an order confirmation page. We would need data from the order model, order details, customer, and product model. So a view model would allow us to define our own custom model with all the pieces we needed on this page. Let me just skip over this part. So we're not going to work with the view model, but you should know that it's there. And you may want it in your project if you want a more complex model for a particular view. So something like this, a shopping cart view model that has a list of products, a total, and a message. And then we could make that shopping cart view model the model for our shopping cart view. This way our data is strongly typed and we get all our type checking, our IntelliSense, and all our proper casting. So we've already looked at how to add a view. It's pretty simple. So we can just right click and choose add view. And then we get these templates that we looked at a little earlier. Create, delete, details, edit, empty, empty without a model, and list. So we're pretty much always going to pick one of these kinds of view templates. And there's a description of exactly what each one does, but the names are pretty self-explanatory. We know delete is going to be used for deleting an object. Our reference of our script libraries. We've also got these partial views. So our login is a partial. We can see that if our layout, we can see it at the top of our header. It's not a full page. It's a separate view file, but rather than being a full page, it's a partial that we embed in our layout. So the idea is Razor's supposed to give us a really lightweight syntax for mixing HTML and our server-side code, but our code's much more readable than PHP. We also get IntelliSense support, so we get code hinting. Through this. So any time we want to show server-side code, we're going to use that @ symbol. And we don't have to indicate the end of an expression, which is great. Now, what about if we have an @ symbol in our HTML, right? Can we do this? Or is this going to be server-side code? Right? Razor is smart enough to recognize the general pattern of an email, and it's going to know this is not server-side code just because there's an @ symbol here, which is great. So we'll start an expression with an @ symbol, and then again, we can inject a server-side variable inside. So we've already done this last week. Okay. If we've got multiple lines, we're going to enclose them in curly braces. So we can do expressions like this. We want to, let's say, add two variables together. And we can combine text and markup. We've already done this. We can also add server-side comments with @ and *@. We want to put in code, disable it in our view. We've already talked about layouts. And we won't work with partials much, but there's a bit of an explanation of what this might look like. So a partial view is not a full page, it's a piece of a page. It gets embedded into another page. Kind of like an include file in PHP. Okay, so I just wanted to go over that stuff. You can reference those slides. There may be some questions in your quiz that comes here. We set brands. Yes, Boogra. So we could do brands, comma, not index. Yes. So that's a great question. If we rename this file to not index, then yes, here first we would pass the model, and then we would pass, some other view name here. Actually, sorry, it goes the other way. Notice the parameter, Visual Studio is helpful, right? It's actually the opposite. The name of the view is first and the model is second. So it would be like this. As a string, some other view name, and then the data second. Great question. So this would work if we had a view called some other view name. But very rarely are we going to have a mismatch between our model name and the name of the view that it loads. There's no real good reason to. So my advice in working with MVC, .NET MVC for a long time is just stick to that naming convention. I would recommend. But excellent question. Okay, are there any other questions from anybody about .NET views or Razor syntax? If there are no questions, what I want to do, we're not going to connect it. Many of you said one of the things you're anxious to learn is, well, how does the database play into this? So what we're going to do today, I'm going to set up two databases actually, one on my local SQL server. I'm also going to set one up on the Microsoft Azure cloud platform. Now, for our .NET Drink store, it's going to be faster to just use a local database. But for your project, you're going to need to use an Azure database so that you can publish your app and it will run live on the internet. Now, I'm assuming, does everybody in the class have SQL Server already installed on their machines? You use SQL Server. Okay, everybody's got it. Okay, great. If you do not have Okay, everybody's got it. Excellent. So I'm going to go through the process of just setting up the database. I'm going to do it locally, and then we're going to sign into the Microsoft Azure portal and set up a database there as well. But you don't need to keep the one on Azure for your .NET Drink site. You only need one for your assignment. So I'm going to open up SQL Server Management Studio, which you should have. If you don't, you can get it. The link is on Blackboard. You can install it so under Tools and Resources. And again, if you're a bit behind and you don't have the software now, that's fine. Just you don't need it to do it for today. Just make sure you do it before next week's class. So if you need SQL Server, you can get the developer version from Azure for Education, and you can get SQL Server Management Studio from here. It's free. And it's like Microsoft's version. It's kind of like MySQL Workbench, but it's on steroids. Works much better, much more fully featured. So most of the time when I'm working in the .NET world, sit down on my computer, I open up two things every day. I open up Visual Studio, I open up Management Studio. You can connect from Visual Studio directly to your SQL Server databases, but it's slow and the functionality is really limited. So I recommend using Management Studio. Now, you guys, are you using it in your advanced database class right now? Using Management Studio? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to open up Management Studio, and I'm going to connect to my local server first, and I'll create the database. Then I'll walk through how to do it on Azure. So I get this connect to server. So by default, it's got my server name. This is my local computer. So you can either enter your computer name. Often you can even just use the word in bracket local. And if nothing is here, under server name, you can click Browse for More and expand your database engine, and here's your local computer. Now, depending on how you installed SQL Server, it defaults to Windows authentication. So if you didn't change this when you set it up, you can just click Connect and you'll be connected. I set mine up using SQL Server Authentication, where I have to put in a username and password. And I've checked Remember Password, which saves me having to re-enter it every time. So I'll just click Connect. The Object Explorer window opens. I know that probably you already know, most of you already know this, which is great. I'll expand databases. Here's all the databases I've been doing. Some of these are clients, some of them are from teaching, some of them are just from testing and goofing around. Creating a database is really simple. Right-click the databases folder, new database. I don't want any spaces here. I'm going to call it .NET Drinks, right? So match the name of the project. And I'll click OK. And now I've got an empty database here. Pretty simple. So I'm going to use this database most of the time in class because it's going to be faster to connect and read and write from the database if I'm working locally. I don't think if you guys are doing this in Advanced Database, I think you already know how to do this. Probably nothing new here. I do also want to set up a database in the Azure portal. Again, you may want to follow along with me, but then delete this database and work locally for your .NET Drinks. But then you'll go through this process again with your database for your assignment. So to set up a database on Azure, you are going to go to portal.azure.com. I'll put the link in the chat as well. So Azure is Microsoft's cloud service. It offers an enormous suite of products. We're going to use it for web and database hosting, but we've got all kinds of other things. It's got storage accounts. So let's say, we want to build some kind of online document library where people can upload. We can use storage. It supports all kinds of different application frameworks. We can build APIs. We can build messaging services. Tons of stuff on here. And actually, recently, our department, we've signed a partnership with Microsoft where you can take Microsoft Azure certification exams. And I believe, I will double check, but I believe we have a number of voucher codes where we will cover the fee, the $100 or $165 US exam fees if you study for a Microsoft certification exam. So I can roll out some more details on that later on. So what we want to do here is inside of Azure, I'm going to click on Create a Resource. And I'm going to, should see SQL Server, SQL Database here. If you don't see it, you can search in the search box or even the search box up at the top. You can just search for SQL Database. And I'm just going to click on the Create button. So this is a little different than when you were in your PHP class. We gave you a database on our AWS server. You didn't have to do anything. And Azure allows you, because you might have lots of resources, it allows you to group them together, basically based on project, or if you're in a large organization, you might group it based on, the department. So these groups are called resource groups. So I've got some resource groups from the past, but I'm going to create a new resource group. And I'll call this .NET Drinks. So I'm going to group my database, and then when I publish my web application to Azure, which I'll do next week, I'm going to group them together. So I'll create a .NET Drinks group. I have to create a database name. Again, I'll call it .NET Drinks. No spaces. And then I want to create a new SQL server. So I'll click on Create New, and I'll call it .NET Drinks. And now I've got to specify my own username and password. And you'll need to put these credentials in a file because if you forget them, you'll have to reset them. So I'll call it, my password will be summer 2021.
Rich.
Yep, just 1 second. I'll get your question. And then I'm going to pick, generally it's a good idea to pick the region that's closest to us geographically because our connections are going to be faster. So I will pick Canada Central. And then I'm going to put all these credentials in a file. So I'm just going to open up a text file. Marilla, I'll come to your question and just bear with me for just a second, okay? So I'm going to create a little text file on my machine. So my host will be .NET drinks, database.windows.net. My DB will be called drinks. So I'm going to save this file on my computer so that if I forget my credentials for the database, I'll have them. Okay, Marilla, go ahead. And I'm just going to click OK here.
Yeah, Rich. So I'm getting one problem with Azure. Can I share my screen quickly? Or
Okay.
yeah, I got this issue before, but yeah, I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah, you do need to create an Azure for Students account and verify your student identity. And again, if you're not doing it right this minute, okay, so it's not an Azure free account you want. It's an Azure for Students account.
Yeah, I'm logged in with my student here, credentials.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, you don't want to go to this, it's not the free account we need. So, okay, let me find the URL we need. If we do a search for Azure for Education, I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
It's this. So I'm going to share again so you can see the link. Hang on, bear with me. That's not the right link. They changed this page a lot. I think it's here. Okay, yeah, this is the page we need. So it's try Azure for Students free today. You get $100 credit, no credit card. So if you click,
Yes.
if you click here, it'll then, you have to put in your student email and it'll send you a verification email once you complete this.
Yeah, I got this page, and then I got this information. We are not eligible. Maybe I need to sign out, and I don't know.
Yeah, you may need to sign out. If it doesn't work, then you can also try, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can use a personal Microsoft account. The other thing you can try is you have two Georgian email addresses, right? You have the one, you have like your student number at student.georgianc.on.ca. You also have the mygeorgian.ca, which is typically first.last at mygeorgian.ca. So you can always try the other one or any personal Microsoft login. Any one of these should work.
Okay, perfect. I will try later. Thank you so much.
So the other thing is you'll notice that it starts at general purpose database, which we don't need. This is going to eat up your Azure credits too quickly. So under configure database, I'm going to click this because I don't want the standard configuration. I just want, so notice it defaults to this general purpose with the cost estimate of, way too much per month, $500 a month. So it says looking for basic standard premium. We're looking for basic. So I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to pick the basic workload. So this is going to only use about $7 a month of my Azure credit. So I want the smallest option. So I'm going to apply that, and now it says my storage is basic. So I'll try review and create, and I'll click create. And then I'm going to try to connect to the database in Management Studio. We're almost done. We've got to just do one more step with this, and then we'll stop for today. So this is going to take a minute to provision. It's going to provision the new server, and then within the server, generate the database. So again, my suggestion is create this database for .NET Drinks today, but then you can delete it on Azure. So you can go through the process once, and then you'll create a separate database to use for your assignment. So you can run .NET Drinks locally. You'll run your assignment database in the cloud on Azure. So I'll wait for this to finish. Shouldn't take too long. While this is working, I'm going to set up my connection to the Azure Database through Management Studio. So over here in my database engine, I like to organize my stuff into groups. So I've created an Azure group, but you don't really need to. So I'm going to, under my local server group, I'm going to create a new server registration. So this is where I need those credentials. Okay, Adam, you'll have to check why. If it fails, there should be some information there. Okay, so it's saying it's already doing something. Ongoing logical server request. Okay, so you may just have to give it a couple minutes and retry. It's saying ongoing server request. Again, if you don't do it right this minute, that's okay. You can always come back and refer to the video. If you're still having an issue, you can let me know. So it's created the server. So now I have to add my server name, which is .NET Drinks, .database, .windows, .net. It automatically takes that URL, that host name is the register server name. I've got to change the authentication. We can't use Windows for this. We need to use SQL Server Authentication. And I'm going to enter the username and password that I just set up in the Azure portal. And I'll choose remember password so I don't have to keep entering it every time I want to connect to the database. I can put in a description here. So this is Comp2084 Wednesday, summer 2021. Now I'm going to try and test my connection. It says my deployment is complete, my server's set up. So here is the database. So I'm going to click on test. And it says, okay, why did it fail? Cannot open server requested by the login. My IP address is not allowed. So by default, when you create an SQL Server on Azure, it doesn't allow remote connections. So it wants us to add a firewall rule for this IP address. So I'm going to go back to the Azure portal. And I've got this link here that says Set Server Firewall. I'm going to click on it. And now I have a few options. If I just want to add my current IP address, I could click Add Client IP. That would work. However, if my IP changes or I want to work somewhere else, come to campus and work, I'm suddenly going to be blocked. So what I'm going to do is add a rule here. I've got these 3 text boxes down here that says rule name, start IP, end IP. I'm going to create a rule called all. And I'm going to allow all IPs, and you'll need to do this in your assignment, from 0.0.0.0, all IP4 subnets. So I'm creating a rule, so any IP, anybody, no matter what my IP is, as long as I have the right username and password, I can connect to the database remotely. And then I'll just click the save button up here at the top. It tells me it's updating my firewall. It says it's successfully updated, and now my rule shows up here, which I could modify or delete. Now I'm going to go back to Management Studio and try to connect again. This time it should let me in. So I'll click OK. It says, yep, okay, now you're connected. Now that the firewall is enabled. And now I can just save that connection. And here's my .NET Drinks. If I double click it, so now in my Object Explorer, I'm connected to both. Connected to my local server. I'm also connected to the .NET Drinks database I have here on Azure. Both databases are empty. That's okay, we'll start to build these out next week. So there's no tables here, which is fine. We're going to use Visual Studio to auto-generate our database tables next week. Another really cool feature of .NET development. Okay. So I'm going to leave my .NET Drinks database up on Azure. Again, you don't really need it for today. I just wanted to go through the process of showing you how to create it. So we're creating a new SQL Server. We give it a name, we name the database, we give a username and password. And then once it's set up, we need to go to our server firewall and create a rule to allow any IP address in as long as the user provides the right credentials. Those of you who are getting errors, so I see Adam Connor, do you want to give me an update? Is it still erroring out for you?
It'll be easier just to say it. My deployment failed 3 times, and I tried to fix it, and I accidentally deleted it. And now when I try to recreate the server, I can't use .NET Drinks because it says it exists, but I don't know where to go find that.
Okay, maybe what we'll do, if you want, I can hang around for a bit. This was all I wanted to do today, so I'm happy to stay in the room if people, and I can help troubleshoot one at a time. I may have to have people enable some screen sharing, but we can do that. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording for today. So for next week, here's your checklist, right? Complete the week 3 quiz. Make sure you build out the create a brand form as we did together. If you didn't contribute, if you weren't here to participate in the PowerPoint file, make sure you do that, and make sure you create a local database. And then you can get working on, make sure you can set up your project for assignment 1B. So next week in class, we're actually going to plan out our .NET Drinks database. We're going to build the tables and start interacting and performing create, read, update, delete. So how does our ASP.NET application work with our SQL Server database? So that's all for today. Have a great week. I will, as I said, I'll stick around in the room for a little while if anybody needs any help, and I'll get the videos posted later today. So thanks everybody for all your energy today and your effort and contributions. Have an awesome week. I'll see you all next Wednesday.